At the family dinner, my dad made a hurtful joke that left everyone laughing except me. Instead of reacting, I left quietly that night. And weeks later, when they tried to reach out, I had already moved on in ways they didn't expect. Hi Reddit, I'm 32F, and I guess you could say I've always been the odd one out in my family. Not in a dramatic black sheep kind of way. More like I was the quiet puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the loud, boisterous picture my parents loved to frame our family as. I've always been a bit more reserved, thoughtful. I think before I speak. I pause before I react. In a family like mine, that gets misread real fast. For the sake of this story, I'll call myself Mira. My dad's name will be Ray, and my mom, Celeste. I'm the oldest of four. My siblings, Dax, 30M, Lena, 27F, and Theo, 24M, all still live fairly close to our childhood home and are very much enmeshed in the family orbit. I'm the only one who moved away, and that distance, emotional and physical, has always been interpreted as defiance by my parents, especially Ray. Ray is the type of man who thinks every interaction is an opportunity to put on a show. He thrives on attention, has a quick wit that can cut just as easily as it can charm, and for as long as I can remember, he's treated our family dinners like he's holding court. He'll make fun of someone's job, someone's haircut, or someone's weight, always under the guise of just playing around. And when people laugh, which they always do, he gets that smug look that tells you he thinks he's the smartest one in the room. As kids, it was hard not to laugh too. You didn't want to be the one he turned on next. You didn't want to be labeled as the one who couldn't take a joke. But over the years, especially as I got older, the jokes stopped feeling like jokes to me. They felt like weapons. I'll be honest, I spent most of my 20s trying to please them. I got a steady job I didn't love, stayed close enough to home to show up at birthdays, smiled through the comments about being too sensitive or too serious, and tried not to let it get to me when my parents would brag about my siblings' accomplishments and skip right over mine. I thought that's just how family was. You take the hits and keep showing up. But over the last year, something shifted. Maybe it was burnout. Maybe it was finally giving myself permission to live on my own terms. But I quit my job, moved out of the city, and started a small consulting business that gave me the freedom and independence I hadn't realized I craved so deeply. I didn't tell anyone right away, not because I was hiding it, but because I knew how it would be received. In our family, anything outside the traditional route was seen as flaky or unserious. Anything quiet was suspicious. My parents are the kind of people who equate success with loud, visible proof. You have to talk about your promotion, flash your new car keys, bring up your salary without being asked. That's how they measure worth, by how shiny and audible it is. So when I started something for myself, worked in silence, and stopped playing into their approval system, they didn't know what to do with me. Which brings me to the dinner. It was my mother's birthday, and they decided to host the celebration at our old family home. It was a big event, not just immediate family, but extended relatives, some neighbors, old friends from church. The house was packed, warm with the smell of food, loud with overlapping conversations, and buzzing with that specific kind of energy I've always found draining. I hadn't been home in a while, not because I was avoiding them exactly, but because I'd been busy, building something new, something that felt like mine for the first time in a long time. When I walked in, I immediately felt like a stranger in a place that used to be mine. The photos on the walls hadn't changed, but somehow the way people looked at me had. I got the usual greetings, the polite hugs, the "oh wow, it's been ages," the side comments like, "we weren't sure you'd show." I brought dessert, homemade, something I'd taken time with. My mom gave me a stiff smile when she saw it, and Ray looked at the box and said, "You didn't just buy this on the way, did you?" I laughed a little, lightly. I was trying to keep the mood up. Dinner was served in the dining room. The long oak table still stood in the middle, surrounded by the same mismatched chairs we used as kids. Everyone found a place. I ended up between my cousin Jace and Lena, who was scrolling on her phone even as we said grace. The first part of the dinner went as expected. Food passed around, people talking over one another, Ray occasionally raising his voice to keep the attention on him. At one point, he started telling a story about how Theo once got a flat tire and cried in the driveway. Everyone laughed. Theo rolled his eyes but didn't deny it. Then someone asked Jace about his job. He works in finance and had just gotten a promotion. Ray clapped him on the back and said, "Finally, someone in this family who's going to retire before 80. More laughter. Then Lena talked about a trip she was planning, and Celeste jumped in to say how proud she was of how ambitious she'd become. Then, and I should have known this was coming, my mom turned to me and said, "Myra's been working on something too, haven't you?" I froze for just a second, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I knew what would come next. I gave a brief, quiet summary, just said I'd started consulting and that things were going well. Nothing boastful, just enough to acknowledge the question. That's when Ray leaned back in his chair, looked around the table with that familiar grin, and said, "Oh, that's right, Myra's little startup. You know, the one where she works in pajamas and convinces herself she's changing the world from her couch." The room burst into laughter. I didn't. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not from shame, but from the quiet, slow realization that this was never going to change. Not for me. Not in this house. Not in this family. And this time, I didn't try to explain. I didn't laugh. I didn't correct him or offer proof that I was doing well. I didn't try to win them over. I just placed my napkin on my plate, stood up, and said softly, "Happy birthday, Mom." And I left. I didn't hear from any of them for 3 days. Then the texts started coming in. First from Celeste, then Dax, then Lena. All with the same tone. "Hey, are you okay? You know Dad was just messing around, right? Don't be so sensitive, Mira. We missed you." But I didn't respond. Because by the time they thought to reach out, I had already started making decisions that none of them were prepared for. I didn't respond to the first few messages. Not because I was trying to punish them, but because I needed to let the silence speak for itself. I didn't want to engage in the usual dance, the back and forth where I explained why I was hurt, and they told me I shouldn't be, then wrapped it up in some empty family phrase like, "We all tease each other," or "It's just love in disguise." I've played that part enough times to know it always ends the same, with me feeling like I overreacted and them walking away unchanged. Instead, I let the messages pile up while I focused on me. My apartment, small but sunlit, had never felt more like home than it did in those days after the dinner. The quiet was comforting. I spent my mornings sipping tea by the window, answering emails from clients who respected me, not laughed at me. My evenings were full of small rituals, baking, organizing, watching films that made me think. There was peace in the silence, even though I knew it wouldn't last. Because people like my parents don't like to be ignored, especially by someone they still see as the child. On the 5th day, Ray called. I didn't pick up. 2 hours later, Celeste texted again. "It's been almost a week. Your father is worried. Please don't let one little joke drive a wedge between us." A wedge, as if that dinner joke had been the first splinter. Still, I said nothing. I kept working. I onboarded 2 new clients that week and even scheduled a brand photography session for my business. I was moving forward, something I don't think any of them believed I was capable of. And maybe that's why, the following weekend, they showed up. Unannounced. I was just finishing up some reports when I heard the buzz from the building's front door. I glanced at my phone and saw 2 missed calls from Dax. Then the intercom rang. I stood there, not moving. Then came the knock on my actual door, loud, familiar. I didn't have to look through the peephole. I knew. I opened the door slowly. Sure enough, there they were. Ray, standing with arms folded like a disappointed coach. Celeste holding a store-bought pie like it was a peace offering. And Dax, awkwardly holding his phone like he was half expecting to live stream this mess. "Mira," my father said, tone neutral, "we need to talk." I didn't step aside. He sighed. That exaggerated sigh he always used when he thought I was being difficult. "You've made your point. You're upset. But dragging it out like this isn't healthy." "I didn't ask you to come," I replied. My voice was calm, measured. That seemed to throw them a bit. Celeste stepped forward, giving me that half-tilted head she always used when trying to appear gentle. "We just want to understand, honey. This whole thing has gone too far. Your father didn't mean any harm." I stayed quiet for a moment, studying them. Same house guest smiles they always wore when visiting relatives they didn't actually like. Not a trace of actual remorse. Just frustration that their show had lost its audience. Eventually, I stepped back. Not out of forgiveness, but curiosity. I wanted to hear what version of the story they'd try to spin. They sat stiffly on the couch while I remained standing by the kitchen island. Ray cleared his throat. "Look, Mira, you know how I am. I joke around. Always have. Always will. You've just gotten too serious lately." I blinked at him. "You mock my work. In front of 30 people." He waved that off. It wasn't mocking. It was just teasing. If you'd told us more about it, maybe we wouldn't be guessing. Celeste jumped in. We didn't even know what you've been doing, sweetheart. You've kept us in the dark. I folded my arms. You've never asked. And every time I shared something personal, it got turned into a punchline. Dax finally spoke up, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. I mean, come on, Mira. It was a room full of people. You know how he is. Did you really expect him to sit quietly while everyone else got the spotlight? That stunned me. They didn't even try to deny that it was intentional. It wasn't just a harmless joke. They were fully aware that Ray was deliberately shifting attention away from anyone else's moment and back to himself. I was about to ask them to leave when Celeste added the final blow. You always make everything about you. Honestly, we've walked on eggshells around your moods for years. You're not the only one who's been hurt in this family. That was when something inside me went still. Because I knew then that no matter what I said, no matter how calmly or logically I laid things out, they would always find a way to twist it back on me. Somehow, I'd always be the problem, the burden, the one who was too much and not enough all at once. I looked at them, really looked, and saw people who had never actually tried to know me, just control me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, this is my home, and I'm asking you to leave. Ray stood up first, fuming but still trying to keep that fake diplomatic tone. We're just trying to help. But you've made it clear you'd rather sulk than be part of this family. Celeste left the pie on the counter like some symbolic gesture of love, then walked out without a word. Dax muttered a half-hearted "see you around" and followed them. I locked the door behind them and stood there in the silence. A silence that didn't feel lonely this time. It felt earned. After that visit, I knew I had to do something more than just ignore them. They weren't going to back off unless I drew a clear line. A line that didn't just say I'm hurt, but you don't get access to me anymore. So I began taking quiet steps. Unsubscribed from the family group chat. Blocked numbers I didn't need to hear from. And most importantly, I began preparing something none of them saw coming. Something that would force them to look at me in a different light. Something that would remind them that I wasn't the weak link they thought I was. A few days after they showed up uninvited, I received a letter in the mail. Not a handwritten note, not an apology, but a printed invitation. It was for Theo's engagement party. The envelope was thick, the kind that people use when they want to make sure you understand the event is important. Inside was a pale blue card, embossed with silver letters, and a small slip that read, "We hope to see the whole family there. Love, Ray and Celeste." There was no note addressed to me personally. No mention of what had happened just days before. Just a casual assumption that I'd show up, smile politely, and resume my role as the distant but obedient oldest daughter who kept her thoughts to herself. It was so on-brand for them, it almost made me laugh. Instead, I folded the invitation neatly and slid it into a drawer. Not out of sight. I wanted to be reminded. Because while they were busy organizing their next celebration, I was quietly preparing my own. You see, my business, the one Ray mocked in front of a room full of people, wasn't just a little consulting thing. I had been building it for almost 2 years under the radar. What started as side gigs and referrals had grown into something structured, profitable, and, most importantly, mine. I specialized in helping mid-sized creative brands organize their internal operations, improve efficiency, and rebrand in ways that made them scalable. I'd helped one company triple their revenue in under a year. Another client had expanded internationally with the systems I implemented. I never posted about it on Facebook, never brought it up at family dinners, because I knew what would happen. They didn't value what they didn't understand. But I didn't need their understanding anymore. What I needed, and finally had, was leverage. And I was going to use it. It started with a quiet meeting. I reached out to a client I'd been working with for a year, a successful boutique interior design company looking to branch into commercial spaces. The founder, Ava, had become a friend as well as a client. When I told her my idea, she leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "You want to rent a space?" she asked. "For what?" "For me." I said simply. "I'm ready to go public." I didn't mean launching with social media blasts or trying to impress strangers online. I meant opening a small, professional studio, part work hub, part showcase, where I could bring clients, host workshops, and finally own a space that reflected everything I'd built. The location I had my eye on. A renovated warehouse unit near the edge of the arts district, 10 minutes from where Theo's engagement party would be held. And the opening? Scheduled for the same weekend. It wasn't petty. It was strategic. Over the next month, I worked in silence. I hired a branding photographer to take professional headshots, commissioned new signage, ordered sleek furniture and custom materials. I curated a space that felt like me, minimalist, warm, professional. A stark contrast to the suffocating, performative vibe of my parents' world. And while I did this, they kept calling. Lena messaged me every few days. You coming to Theo's party? Don't make it weird. Celeste emailed me links to outfits she thought I should wear. Soft colors flatter you, dear. Don't come in black like you're attending a funeral. And Ray? He sent a voicemail that still makes my stomach turn. Mira, look. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but this weekend's not about you. It's about Theo. Try not to bring any tension, okay? Just smile, clap when he gives his little speech, and enjoy the food. That's all anyone's asking. No apology. No responsibility. Just a thinly veiled command to behave. They wanted a performance, but they weren't going to get it from me. Instead, I sent out invitations of my own, not to my family, but to a carefully curated list of clients, collaborators, former colleagues, and local professionals I'd quietly built relationships with over the years. People who'd seen my work, trusted my skills, and believed in what I was doing. The invitation read, "You're invited to the soft launch of Mira K. Strategy Studio. Come celebrate the opening of a space built on quiet resilience and bold ambition." It was subtle, but if you knew, you knew. The night of the engagement party arrived. I wore a soft blue dress, not because Celeste had suggested it, but because it matched the accent wall in my studio. As I walked around the space, greeting guests, showing them the setup, and answering questions about the services I offered, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rooted. This was my space, my pace, my rules. A few of my guests mentioned they had driven past Theo's party on the way in. Looked crowded, one of them said. Bit over the top for an engagement party, don't you think? I just smiled and nodded. I didn't need to be at Theo's party, clapping politely in a corner while Ray made jabs about who was next to get married or whose career was real. I was exactly where I needed to be. And then came the moment I wasn't expecting. A knock on the door. The soft launch was winding down, and most of my guests were either chatting in small groups or getting ready to head out. I opened the door, expecting maybe a late-arriving invitee. It was Lena. She looked different. Not just because of the party dress or the dramatic makeup. She looked agitated, like someone who had just walked through a storm. "Wow," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "So this is what you've been doing." I stayed quiet, watching her eyes dart around the studio. Her expression shifted, part impressed, part offended. "I thought you were sick or something," she continued. "You skipped Theo's party. Everyone was asking where you were." I shrugged. I had something more important to be at. She blinked. "You mean this?" I nodded. She looked around again. "Does Dad know?" "No," I said. "Not yet." And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just surprised. She was rattled. Because for the first time in our lives, I had done something they couldn't minimize, mock, or meddle with. I had succeeded, quietly, independently, and they hadn't seen it coming. She didn't stay long. Said something about not wanting to start drama and left with a half-hearted congrats, I guess. But the next morning, the messages started coming in again, different this time. From Ray. "Heard you had some kind of event last night. Interesting. Would have been nice to be invited." From Celeste. "Your brother was very hurt by your absence. You chose a work party over your own family." And from Dax. "Mom's upset. You really blindsided them, Mira. Was this about revenge?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had finally learned something important. You don't have to announce revenge. You just live it. Let them gossip. Let them speculate. Let them twist the story to make themselves the victims. The truth was this. While they were laughing at me at the dinner table, I was building something they'd never be part of. It didn't take long for word to spread. Within a week of my soft launch, a few local blogs picked up the story. Not because I'd pitched it to them, but because some of my early clients had connections and they believed in what I was doing. One article even titled me, "The Consultant Who Built Quiet Success Without the Noise." That one made me laugh. It was never about making noise. It was about building something that didn't depend on their approval. Something they couldn't dismantle with a smirk or a snide remark at dinner. I hadn't posted about it on any of the family social channels, but others had. Photos from the event circulated, showing the polished interiors, the branded materials, And, yes, me, standing confidently in front of my company's name printed across the glass. That's how they found out. Ray called 3 times that day. I let each call ring out. Then came the message. I saw the article. So this is what all that distance was about. A little rebranding party? You couldn't even tell your own father. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Like always, he was trying to shift the conversation from what he did to how I had responded. The same pattern. The same tired tactics. Celeste sent a longer message, one that danced between guilt-tripping and veiled criticism. We were shocked to find out like this. You've clearly been busy. You should have told us. This family may not be perfect, but we've always loved you. It's hurtful that you've cut us off over a joke. Are you really going to throw away decades of family over one night? They still didn't get it. It wasn't about one night. It was about a lifetime of being minimized, laughed at, overlooked, and told that I was too sensitive anytime I pushed back. But now, things were different. And that difference became very clear the following weekend. A former client of mine, someone I'd helped transition from a struggling freelance designer into a 6-figure agency owner, invited me to speak at a local business leadership panel. It was a small conference, but well attended by the regional business community. I almost said no, but then I found out who else would be there. Ray. He wasn't speaking. He was attending as a guest of another company. His old firm had merged with a larger entity, and he'd taken a more advisory role, as he liked to call it. I knew what that meant. He wasn't in charge anymore. When I arrived, I kept my distance. I didn't try to make a scene. I simply found my seat on the panel, clipped on my mic, and waited for the moderator's cue. The panel lasted an hour. We each shared our journey, challenges, lessons learned. I spoke clearly, not with bitterness, but with certainty. I talked about what it was like to grow a business without mentorship or family support, how sometimes the loudest doubters are the ones closest to you, and how silence, when used with intention, can be more powerful than any argument. When it was over, people clapped. A few approached me afterward. One, a quiet older man with a calm presence, said, "You must come from strong stock. To build what you've built, alone, takes steel." I almost laughed at the irony, but I just smiled and nodded. I didn't see Ray until I was walking toward the parking lot. He was standing near the exit, arms folded, expression unreadable. When he saw me, he stepped forward. "That was quite the speech," he said. His tone was casual, but there was tension behind it. "You really know how to make a point without saying names." I looked at him. "You said it. Not me." He paused, like he expected me to fill the silence. When I didn't, he tried again. "I'm still your father, Mira. We may not see eye to eye, but I'm not the enemy." I tilted my head. "You're not the enemy. But you chose your pride over your daughter's dignity for years. That's not something I can forget or ignore." He sighed. "So that's it then? You're just done with us." I met his eyes. "I'm done pretending you were ever on my side." Then I walked past him. I didn't turn back, not even when he muttered my name under his breath. The months that followed were quiet, at least from them. No more invitations. No more voicemails. A kind of Cold War silence that I welcomed. My business continued to grow. I partnered with another firm to expand into organizational coaching. I hired a part-time assistant. I started speaking at universities. My name began to mean something, and not just in my small circle. And as for my family, well, Lena reached out once more through a mutual friend. She wanted to know if I'd reconsider attending the wedding. I declined, not out of pettiness, but because I didn't need to be the afterthought in another family event, the one they tolerated for appearances. Theo never contacted me again. Dax posted a vague status about family members who change when they get money. I didn't reply. Ray and Celeste, they faded, not out of my memory, but out of relevance. I didn't block them, but I no longer made space for them, either. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I had finally chosen myself. They had their dinner table, their jokes, their smug sense of control. I had my own name on a door, my own people who respected me, and a life where I no longer had to shrink to fit. That was all the closure I needed. And that, truly, was the end. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.